emotional investment in.
No, don't worry about it because the investment in e-drama. No,
I
no,
know.
no. It's apparently this guy. I'm gonna paywall this part of it. Oh, did I mention? I hope my Patreon comes in approved. Hopefully, I mean they approve everyone, don't they? Like that's not.
I don't have a Patreon. I just know that there was.
Star.
I went straight for these people will monitor my off Patreon or off content or whatever appearances. So it's just like I'm just gonna play it safe and not bother. Plus, if anyone asks, I can take that moralizing stand when they ban Sargon or whatever. Like I can play it like it's 2016.
Yeah, hopefully like that doesn't happen. If not, like I mean, I don't know. Maybe I should have went with Subscribestar. But it's Patreon's like the go-to.
Well, yeah, Patreon, Subscribestar, Ko-fi, BuyMeACoffee.com. Like, there's so many options now. It's not that bad.
Ko-fi. I was thinking of Ko-fi. I might like, but I think like Patreon. Like, I'll try it out. Like, I mean, if it pans out.
I was told by many a Coomer Zoomer type that apparently of all of the places that PayPegs can give their money away, that OnlyFans takes the smallest cut.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Like to avoid censorship, you have people like Tommy Sotomayor that like goes on like OnlyFans, but like it's like just his like political content. It's not like him like posting with his like thong hanging low or whatever. Like it's just like the ultimate way to avoid censorship. Apparently this
Tariq Nasheed should do that.
Yeah, I know.
And the thong out of your pussy player, like that could be the perfect hook in to subscribe to Tariq Nasheed's like black ethnocentric Africa owes African Americans reparations type content.
Yeah, like it's funny. He should like revive his rap career with that. That'd be. But it's funny. Like, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna be like, he'd be like the anti Kendrick Lamar, who talks about getting molested, and he's just like, yeah, I'm gonna bring back my rap career.
Yeah. Oh my god. He could make it too. Like, apparently, like the Kendrick Lamar thing is very interesting. Like how, because I had the tweet like about like rap used to be pretty red pilled back in the day. Like it's true though. It's true that like in California prison, in Gen Pop where you could like have literature, Behold a Pale Horse was like the most popular book that they that they read. Like so everyone was like getting all like rappers, like all of the West Coast rappers, like is it West Coast or yeah.
Yeah, it was West Coast.
Yeah, like all of them were like red pilled by Bill Cooper. And they like, yeah, the government's against us, man. It's like, and it's true. Like a lot of those rappers, like a lot of like, you can like see it, like you can hear it.
This is what stuck out to me that was the most frustrating thing, and this is something that maybe this is a sign that I've grown tribal in my understanding of politics, or that just. I mean, a man's politics are based on his socialization, the way that he inputs himself in the world and interacts with it. Like, I'm very constructivist in this nature. And it's just like your religion, your ability to interact with people where you come from, all these things play a role, right, in a man's politics. A man's politics are a way that it is a reflection of himself. It is a self-created mirror image.
Exactly.
And the first thing I heard, like, I blocked Lev after all this. Like, I'm just not going to bother. I felt so glad when I could hit unfollow on everything associated with Follow the Rules. But
we're going to meme that, by the way, Follow the Rules.
I hope so. I hope it becomes a delightful meme. And I had saw that he had mentioned, he said he's going to do a short thread on everything that had happened, and then he's going to leave it at that. And then the first thing that he says is that I hate Gio's politics, but, and I'm like, there's no but here. It's just that you hate the man.
Yeah.
It's nice. Like, you can say that you like his art takes or whatever, or philosophy, but at the end of the day, I really do think that if you do hate a man's politics, you just fundamentally hate the man. And I think what we've really seen since this 2015 onward thing, that there is no getting past the fact that our politics are a reflection of our first principles. And if our first principles don't align, then what the hell are we going to align on, Because
politics becomes, I mean, today my internet was choppy, and this is what I was trying to get at with totalitarianism. Because apparently I'm a totalitarian too, as well, even though it's thoroughly modernist invention.
Perish the thought.
Yeah. Well, this is what Elul says about technique, but say like technique. Well, okay, so in the sort of liberal hegemony, technique spreads through economism mostly, in that economic considerations become the sum total of life. So even Agamben said this in his book on the past 2 years of the Chinese delicacy and biopolitics, where the economy becomes the sum total consideration of all politics, politics becomes the sum total consideration of all life. Now this greater apparatus of biopower and bare life becomes the sort of perpetual state of exception. But now that like 2 years on, we're like sort of going away from that to other spectacles. I mean, it's still somewhat relevant, especially here in Canada, but like there is politics becomes a fundamental part of one's identity, I think, because from 2015 onwards, I mean, it becomes more apparent. It seems that in the absence of the classical, let's call it, what did Slaughterday call it? The heliocentric Christendom worldview of that entails a certain picture of the self. Now politics fills that void because politics even itself strays from a more ancient understanding of politics that you find in Aristotle, but not so much because in some ways it's almost like a logical conclusion to the politics of Aristotle, because there is a sort of phronesis, a sort of habituation, like what you do every day is sum total and part of your political being. And so you can't really this is like what we're dealing with essentially is political ontology. You can't really separate the question of being from the question of your own subjectivity, your own personal being, and the question of society and culture and, well, in America, let's call it race as a whole. So politics becomes a very easy void filler in the absence of the sacred, if you will. That is also another book, by the way. But like, so politics has this integral part because when you wed politics to the spectacle, and when you've emptied the subject of everything else in terms of signification, then the spectacle, this is, you know, again, this is classic Guy Debord, like the spectacle becomes the sum total of being, and there's no separation between what is real and what is spectacular. But now when you wed politics to that, when you wed the sort of social consideration to that, now you get sort of like these weird political religions where your whole being is expressed within political belief. So to say like, and you know, shout out to my friend Marcus, he nailed this on the head months ago. He's like, you know, when it comes to the host to follow the rules, like he can say like, okay, Geo is like wholesome Chungus art man, but like when he talks about anything else and it's like, like there really is no, like you were saying, like it's a very convoluted theory cell way of going about it, of generally reiterating what you're saying, Prude, that like politics has a way of grafting itself onto being. And to say I reject your politics is almost in a way saying I reject you, or I reject the sort of bricolage of what constitutes a self, if that, you know, makes sense.
Oh, sure. It makes plenty of sense. And thank you for just listing out all this stuff that I'm going to go eventually add to the Amazon book list of things to buy.
There you go.
People assume I'm way more well-read than they give me credit for. I'm really not. I feel like since coming on to quote unquote the scene, so to speak, it's just been this like brutally punch to the mouth, punch to the Adam's apple of, whoa, you don't know shit, young man. And so it's just been book after book after book after book, which is fine. I don't mind being the guy that's lost in a library, but it's just like, oh shit, man. Like I guess my coming onto the scene of things is just like, oh, you know, I'm not the traditional someone go finds edgy, you know, blog or content or whatever, like,
yeah.
And so it's just like all of this stuff that gets memed about and sort of MSN, like all these far right guys are on the internet or whatever. It's just like, man, I just wanted to talk, you know, like I was always in polite liberal company asking for the contrarian conservative take, normie con take, or being quote unquote one of the good ones, which is like the most disgusting thing that anyone can ever really label you. Like you can call me evil, but the day that you call me one of the good ones, it just makes me feel like a traitor.
Yeah. It's Wait, what are the good ones in relation to what though?
Oh, I know, right? Well, one of the good ones in relation to like you can be in a dinner conversation and just like some like shit lib white progressive can just, and it's always women that do this, just like he's one of the good Republicans or whatever, and I'm like, I don't identify with the Republican Party, like I haven't since like 2016 when I did like electioneering work or so, but like it's just one of the good ones. It's a disgusting phrase, but I've gone on too long of a ramble here just to let everyone know that he's fake when he's talking about things on the internet.
No, it's true. I think like one of the good ones is sort of like a weird like people have a few like responses to like political discourse nowadays. One of them is like being an interlocker in like horse trading and like say you have a scene like This Thing of Ours and then like drama occurs and like it's very easy to like fit things into a narrative and then like making like monkey chain associations between people. Like this other guy, like the other one, he's like, Caleb Maupin retweeted Logo de Atlas, and Logo de Atlas is friends with neo-Nazi Giovanni Penichetti. It's like, bro, you can't even keep up with the deep lore that Logo hates me now. But I'll talk to Logo again if he ever like unblocks me. I don't care. But like, so you have the sort of spectator nonsense. Then you also have the sort of where I guess like that one of the good ones comes from, where there's this like strange one-upmanship that happens where you have to create a box or create a sort of like discursive frame from which you can put people in. It's like you're a fence builder, which by the way, you know what fence building means in pro wrestling? It means say you have a ring rat, which I mean, for those who don't know, ring rats are like more disgusting forms of groupies for like pro wrestlers. And he's like, Honky Tonk Man was like, say you got a girl, you like her, she's a rat, but you don't want, so you're a fence builder, you build a fence around her, you prevent other wrestlers from getting in. Like, so fence building in terms of political discourse is sort of like when you label someone as you're one of the good ones, you're like part of like, you're acceptable, then it's sort of like the fence building it works two ways. It's kind of like the Berlin Wall in some ways. So the 1 century gun going inward is that you police the discourse around someone and you sort of make them conform to your ideal. Because let's face it, when you're dealing with like a lib calling you like one of the good ones, it's like that fence is more powerful because they're literally talking from the voice of power. So they can instantiate this sort of weird, like, oh, don't go out of the fence because out of the fence is evil, racist people. But then the other side is the sort of like keeping people away from you, because let's face it, when it comes to far right politics, like the weird sort of like shark wombing and cults of personality, when you're coded by your enemy as being like, oh, he's a tolerated and acceptable person, then other people more edgy or like more quote unquote like pure on the outside of the fence that should be a part of, they're like, oh, we can't trust that guy because like if libs like him, he must be defective. So it's like this weird like double bind sort of like policing, but
and I'm sure I'm going to eventually encounter that, and maybe into some degree I have, because in the short time I've like decided to play around online. I don't want to say the word play because it implies a level of non-seriousness, but I mean, you get into the game or whatever, even then, right? Language is a fun thing to mess with. But since sort of coming on, and just like I've been rather diplomatic, and I'm relatively friendly to most people that I interact with, even if I disagree with them. Like, like I like talking to Joel Davis, even though I'm sure he and I won't agree to 100%. Like, I like the guys from the Fed Post, and those guys are pretty much straight up Marxists.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you had mentioned Logo, because it's just like in this weird sort of like, I guess, reactionary space. Like, the word reactive gets thrown around a lot these days, but it's interesting to where there's that kind of overlap of postmodern thinking that is now coming upon this quote unquote new right or whatever. And you're seeing like, oh, like I have enjoyable conversations with like individuals with Marxist leanings. I really wish that they would engage far beyond sort of a secular materialism, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that we can both sort of point at the objective reality and be like, oh yeah, like this myth of progress is clear and presently been disproved. Like it's not real.
Yeah, like it's sort of like the eschatological thinking of like the current like regime goes unquestioned. But it's funny, like the new right thing, because like I mean I'm kind of bummed they didn't mention me, actually, because like there was like a few handful of people before me that were talking about like various, like, I guess you would label them like continental or like postmodern thinkers. But then it's like, I don't know, that's just an ego thing, because then like, I mean, it's kind of like in one sense you don't want the Eye of Sauron on you, but then in the other sense it's unavoidable, and like you can sort of like use it in some ways to your advantage. But then at the other end it's like, do I want the average like Vanity Fair reader being like, oh yeah, by the way, this guy like Nazified Michel Foucault or whatever, like, you know what I mean?
Oh, I spent the time. I looked at that article and I was just like, oh man, all of my mutuals are in here, and I was just like, I'm a little mad. I was like, oh, my degree of separation to this like backroom bar scene with like thick cigar smoke. The article is like neutral and sort of almost positive in its spin. It was just like, oh, there's like this sort of like seedy backroom organization that like I'm like 0 or 1 degree of separation away from, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And I just took the time to like talk about it. I had Grace and Quay on, which I only would have met this guy if it were for Follow the Rules.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
But we talked for like 2.5 hours about it, and it was interesting because I was like, oh, good, maybe I can use this to get my way to like normiedom, and I can do what like Default Friend does and just like have my name written on the cover of the American Affairs Journal or something.
Yeah,
because it would be nice to. I've learned that I got typecasted early on, like, oh, he talks about international relations, let's have him on to talk about international relations. And if that's all you do, like, great. But if someone says, oh, you're typecasted and you want to do other stuff, it's like, oh, well, fuck this. I got to start doing something to branch out. And I've been trying to do that. I've been trying to write more, and I want to just do sort of like observations, and I want to put these essays together and put them in a book and have it set out for publication. And it's just like, I find myself more at ease writing about the observations of the culture at the time. Like I've recently been going through a lot of, in my journey back to religion and my journey back to Christ, I've just been reading a ton outside of just scripture, just a ton of church fathers, both West and Eastern.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tell in the feelings of like late Byzantium and late Roman antiquity, that there was a sense from like Augustine, Tertullian, and I mean, even the Eastern guys as well, when they were looking towards the West, that just like, there's this sense of writing that makes you feel like, man, these guys are really hoping that like the second coming is right around the corner, because things seem really, really bad. And they're
now,
back then, right? Like they're writing at a time like post, post edict, post all of the things that allow Christianity to be what it is. But like things are still going down to heck in a handbasket, and they're like, man. Like, they're just writing on these observations, and they're writing about, you can tell in the writing. I mean, even with an English translation, it's just like, these guys are really hoping for some kind of rescue. And I do feel like a lot of the doom and gloom that we kind of write about here is in that similar late antiquity style, where we kind of hope that there's going to be some kind of rescue. I mean, even in what we call the Dark Ages, right, which is a terrible, term for it all. like there's the myth of Prester John during the time of the Crusades, like the mythical Christian king that held out against the Turks and the Saracens. But like,
was that real, or was that a fiction?
Oh, it's a fiction. It's a myth. Prester John never existed.
Oh, damn. Oh, no.
I know, right? Like that's that. But that's the thing. We all hold on to these dreams. We all hold on to like these realities that we want to be so true. They aren't. And sometimes I wonder if we're sort of like, history doesn't repeat, but it sure as heck rhymes. To take that line. And I just wonder sometimes, like, a lot of us do talk about like decline. Like we can clearly tell so much that things are not what they were from our youth. Like you and I are close to the same age. I know you're like 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
But like my favorite as of late that I like hold in my in my saved file on my phone is this like little like the Doge Cheems thing or whatever, and he's got like the little propeller hat on and he's standing in front of the Twin Towers and he's like, boy, I can't. Yeah, boy, I can't wait to grow up in a decade of like economic prosperity and optimism. And like to me, this is just like, man, like Paul Virilio was right. Like this is the original accident. This is what sort of like kicked off this, like, at least for us in a modern context. Because I mean, like if we were to talk to maybe Boomers or Gen X that are maybe more, a little more lived experience, they might tell you like, nah, it was something else. I mean, like Christopher Caldwell or Richard Tanania will be like, no, man, this is like just the culmination of the civil rights regime. But you mentioned biopolitics and power from earlier in regards to the, Chinese delicacy that I find myself just thinking like maybe we're in that new stage. Like this is just the next, kick down the slippery slope, so to speak. And we're just in a position where it's like, yeah, it would be nice if things can be saved, but we're privileged with a point of history of technology and access to these men's great work and instantaneous communication that odds are like it's not going to happen. I mean, no man knoweth the hour. So, we might as well actually like dig in and prepare. Like if anything, we've been blessed by what we have technologically speaking to at least know, what's to come.
Yeah, that I think like in some ways this sort of hyperstational power of the internet has made it so. I had this tweet once, nobody got it. Like if Hegel were to reincarnate today, he'd realize absolute spirit realized itself through the internet, and then he would like absolute spirit would anhero itself, like because like to have a supreme vision, like so there's a number of things there. I think like it's true that because of the sort of displacement of our capacity of knowledge like that's the sort of like the res extenda of our capacity to know about things across the world breeds a sort of, it's funny because even some guy like Jack Dorsey, he said this recently, like a global consciousness, and Twitter is probably the closest to like the pure id driven global consciousness there is. But it's in some ways, I think that with greater awareness also comes like the greater, the real sort of like bone chilling realization of starting to like look at history through accident and through happenstance. Like here's the thing, this is why you should read Virilio. Maybe it's because of my own personal bias, but like, this is why you should read Virilio instead of reading Taleb, because the fruits of Virilio are much more complicated and plentiful and not as, well, if we look at what Taleb has become, well, that's shall know a man by his fruits. You shall know him. But the point the point is though that it's like, okay, what is the black swan? What is anti-fragile? Like, oh, random stuff happens and probability theory. And it's like, but Virilio was looking at the accident from a very specific sort of like instantiation of the way that time works in the age of hypermodernity, the way in which you can think about, okay, from the Twin Towers falling till now, say that was an accident of history. What does that mean to have an accident of history? It pretty much shatters, and this is why the libtards they hate Pomo more than anybody, because when you look at the extringencies of like, okay, if history was an accident, history is not the sort of like perpetual peace thesis that it goes, big line goes up, right? Like it's, when you look at the stopgaps, you look at like hauntology is of course this, nowadays more popular as a term, but that's certainly a part of looking at history from a different lens, in that there are virtual times in which we should have, but like should implies an ought, or should implies like a moral good. But let's say the possibility of them happening without implying that some other virtual timeline would have been better than the other one. The hauntology of the possibility still hangs in the air of our trajectory. So this is in a way looking at history from this very, there's recursions, there's stopgaps, there's potholes, if you will, from the sequence of events. When you look at things from that perspective, now that becomes quite interesting. It's more meaningful than saying, oh, well, stuff happens and there's black swan events that turn and, throw your plans out and, anti-fragility, blah, blah, blah. Like there's something there. And I think that what you were saying, like the last 2 years is really like showing that. But anyways, I hope that like what we're going to do right now, hopefully we'll break you out of your shell, break you out of your shell a little bit. Cause like,
well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned Virilio, because like I was recently rereading the original Accident, because like 6 months ago I wrote this script in regards to a certain medical sacrament, and how there's this line in the original Accident that Virilio uses kind of offhandedly that I really wish that he wrote more about before he died, which was like the genetic Hiroshima. Like, oh, come on, Paul, there's so much that you could have worked with in this. Yeah. So much there. And you kind of look at everything post sacrament and then you're like, but like really, I think that sort of the genetic Hiroshima really does come post plastic era. Like how much in a hyper processed, industrialized form of agriculture, processing for food, the pumping in genetic material for more protein. Like the average chicken of today did not look like the average chicken in 1957.
Oh yeah.
And now we're talking about finding microplastics in deep lung tissue and organ transplants. I can't help but think that the genetic Hiroshima is here. Mankind has created a self-imposed genetic bottleneck. Like we will see a bottleneck event in human like evolutionary history, I think, from this time frame if the species survives.
There is a really great I consider him one of the best living philosophers. Do you know the YouTuber Chad African?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I followed this guy back in like 2013 when he was Chad African. And his book Being in Oil touches upon this, how like oil, because it's so much in everything in terms of microplastics and so forth, oil has a sort of like ontological purpose. It's sort of like he gets into like Hegel and Heidegger and so forth. Like Heidegger is obvious because of like the question concerning technology. But like if we say that oil itself is, because of its particular being, its particular malleability, and the ease of which it can transfer into anything, and like you can think of like even just like simple things like food preservation, how like plastics have contributed to like the longevity of food, the availability of it, but then also now we know the negative consequences of it. That's almost unavoidable. So in essence, like oil does have a being of beings in itself, but I can never stop thinking of my good friend who I recorded 3 hours with, Trash World Citizen. He had this one tweet that was so brilliant. I think when his account was Echo Autist, he said that nothing of worth will be remembered of this time period except when the hideously mutated archaeologists of the future basically like lift up a core sample. The only thing left of our time period will be like an inch layer thick of plastic in the core sample. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so brutal. Like, oh man. You there, Prude?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I was taking that kind of all in. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Like, I do wonder sometimes about what the future may hold in that regard. Like, that kind of far off thing. I mean, we like to speculate all the time. I remember growing up, you had like that Discovery Channel, like, oh, we sent a probe back to Earth millions of years in the future just to see what like evolution is like.
Oh,
or
yeah.
Like that stuff like that has always been interesting
or, like,
to
Viking,
me. Yeah. and like this like deep layer of plastic. Like, do you think the social issues of today are going to live that long? Like, I would love to see them argue, 6,000 years from now, or 18, or whatever the contemporary time difference would be, and listen to them argue about transgendered troops, like based off skeletal remains, in the same way that we politicized Viking remains.
Maybe the Zeta Reticuli reptilians, they will have cosmic abortions. Maybe that would
cyberspace still, it's like canceling the download folder before it finishes downloading off your browser or whatever. Just be like, digitally abort my neo fetus from whatever cyberspace that I exist in.
There could be a weird like Rings of Saturn metal fans that go into that. Yeah. But yeah. The alien metal thing, that was a total meme, but they memed themselves into going on the Summer Slaughter tour. That's why I saw them 3 times. But it's very interesting, the genetic Hiroshima. There's also that book that in a lot of weird ways correlates with bio-Leninism, called The Spiteful Mutants. You know that book?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
And I mean, this goes on to the list of other man-made horrors beyond our comprehension, because we're distinctly aware of things, and this is where I have grown to have a severe worrisome gut feeling when schizo posters on Twitter start talking about things that I'm remotely aware of, and I'm like, oh no. But we know nothing more or less about how prion diseases really work.
And
what we do know, those terrify me, because it's just that it's basically a death sentence, and we have no real manageable inoculation or cure behind that. And so it's just if that were to ever be a real serious thing, that's game over for a good chunk of the population. And
they
they're talking
in a lab setting.
No, they can't.
Yeah, they have some crazy procedure to keep the instruments on it.
Yeah, so that's something epidemiology is just one of the more unique things to talk about, because it's just, we know so much, but the more that you actually start reading or even doing cursory research, it's we really know so little. And I found that in my time just sort of being online in the way that I am now, just to be so fundamentally true about most things. Whether it's about virology or our current issue with the Chinese delicacy, it's just we have no fundamental awareness really about our history, our current methodologies, our relatively recent Enlightenment onwards. Our contemporary understanding of archaeology still doesn't make sense, and the things that we do know or are partially aware of are sort of just tossed aside as legend or whatnot. I think one of my favorite Schwab threads is still about the giants of South America. That's something one of my favorites, and the stuff that he posts is great. And that I think, why aren't we talking about the fact that perhaps there were other because again, my mind immediately goes, it's because that's an HBD narrative that we can't acknowledge to be true.
The ancient vital step warriors, they were 10 feet tall. No, I think, but it's interesting, prions, they are a protein. They're technically not a disease or a virus. So that's what makes them, but thank God that they're kind of hard to catch. But there's researchers, for example, in France, there's only 100 scientists that are even that have the qualifications to handle prion material, and a lot, I think 15 of them recently, in the last 10 years, have been exposed and have died of Creutzfeldt Jacobs, and you literally go insane. It turns your brains into Swiss cheese. It's basically, imagine if severe dementia could kill you. That's basically what it is.
At a much quicker rate.
Yeah, at a very much quicker rate. Because I think they say that dementia does have debilitating effects on your health. I forget. Yeah, they say that definitely subjectively your quality of life goes way down. I mean, that's a given. But I think you are susceptible to various diseases and so forth. But yeah. So I really get antsy and very I think why I wrote this essay, but these people, like, it was for this conference, but they haven't gotten back to me. It was basically fleshing out this thread I did at the very beginning of the current thing of the last 2 years. The thing is, like, I had this thread. I think you saw it. This is like when you first started on Twitter. The aesthetic, the sort of what do they call it? The pandemic aesthetic, like the sort of like biomedical state of exception. Why, like, to me. And I wrote this essay like about Agamben and Foucault and the sort of various works of art that have come about from the pandemic. And I like have this chapter I compared to Francis Bacon. It's really out there. But to me, like anything to do with like medical science, like even just an aesthetic level, like it's just like when I was watching this documentary on The River, the book, and they're like have like the old footage of them like chopping up the monkey liver and like putting them in vats and like, you know, in the 50s. It's like there's something about old medical footage that you find in like when you're, you know, in science class as a kid. There's something like disturbing about that to me. There's something like, ugh, like I don't like it. Like there's an instinctual like repulsion I have towards even like modern like medical aesthetics. Like I know that there's this one photographer, I forget his name, but he was profiled on the BNN art show, what's it called? Brilliant Ideas, where he like photographs different machinery and like medical technology and cells and like this like robotic surgery apparatus thing. And like I think that even like Damien Hirst did this where he like has in a gallery like these photos of cancer cells and AIDS. And it's really like to me though, like a lot of like the aesthetic of science and scientism and medical research is like disturbing to me, and I can't like put my finger on why.
Well, it's disturbing, but like I can't find myself in the way that, right, humans are memento mori, where we're just like innately aware that we can die.
Yeah.
And like you mention all of this like aesthetic and how we view things. I can't immediately help but immediately think of like William, what's his name, Uttermoland, right? The guy that did the portraits while having dementia.
Oh, yeah.
Or more recently, and the thing that fucks with me the most, because I think it's auditory, is of course the most famous piece of media I think out there on like your mental state, Everywhere at the End of Time.
Yes, caretakers.
Yeah, everyone should listen to it and just like be like have your entire state of mind be fucked with. Yeah.
Yeah. The artist that he collabed with on the 6 albums too is like that. There was this one popular like video essayist, like he blew up because he did the essay about the caretakers and like how the paintings are correlated with the song. But anyways, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that has been, especially in the last 2 years, wherein our ability to comprehend horror has transcended back to the otherworldly.
Yeah.
I mean, consider that I've ranted about this before on my channel and the things that I've written about, but it's just consider that prior to where we're at in the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, is that, you know, horror in media was very by the numbers, crescendo here, green sepia filter over there, and there's a jump scare, there's a big scary thing, yeah. Or shit lib urbanite moves back into old house, and through their like, you know, they have to consult the demonologist or whatever, like, you know, your basic shit lib kind of like paint by the numbers media, because you know it sells. It no longer, and I mean, it's no longer the time of found footage of Blair Witch or even the Paranormal Activity movies.
There was, you know, like, that's what I want to talk to you about, the found footage thing.
Well,
yeah, you did the analog.
I'm transitioning to that actually.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But that's why I think that it's interesting now, where there's this like renewed emphasis, I think, on both Lovecraft but also analog horror as a genre, because, you know, Nirala Hotep comes to mind immediately about being lured into things or being sold a delusion despite the horrors of it and going mad. Or now, like I mentioned in previous work with like analog horror, like that's blown up in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Like to me, it initially, like there's like CHSS before the delicacy. There was always, of course, the emergency broadcasting alert scenario things, which ranged from like really realistic to just outright silly. But now you've got serious work done by people that are trying to bring back a sense of, I think, both generational nostalgia, right? Like, of course, it's
Yes.
analog horror. It's something that you and I have like faint memories of
Yeah.
as growing up as children. But at the same time, it also touches into the fact that like the otherworldly is still actually out there, despite in this like digitized, analog, mechanical space. The reason why I find, for instance, like the Mandela catalog to be so fucking scary, when a lot of people don't get it, and which irked me. Like, they're like Night Mind is a content video YouTube essayist who like does explanations for analog horror, and he's like, I think this really falls flat, and I'm like, I don't think you understand how scary this is. Like, the first video that this guy does is basically explaining that God lost and the resurrection did not happen, because it was the devil. And so like the world for like the last 2,000 years has basically been this open space for like what he calls alternates, like these creatures that have the uncanny valley that like, you know, they're not real and will basically drive you insane. So you have to kill yourself.
And the thing mutants.
Is that, yeah, the spiteful mutant, right? Yeah. But the government's in on it. And so like the police dispatchers are informed explicitly, if you get one of these phone calls, try and like tell them that we're gonna like help is on the way, but like do not send anybody, do not do anything about that, and just let them die.
That's sort of like played in a bit with vampires.
Well, yeah, kind of. That's what I thought about that too. But it's just like that one really works well for me. Others have gotten more creative, like Gemini Home Entertainment is like obviously
Gemini,
otherworldly things. Like I'm glad that we're getting back to, I think, a fundamental human horror, which is like we do not understand the incomprehensible, despite this sort of modern man style to do so. And I really think that this is like Lovecraft's like lasting impact on human understanding of literature and horror. It's just like man does lose his mind in things that are unfathomable that he fears. Whereas I think that, and maybe that's done in a very secular sense, because you know, you go back to scripture and it'll be like, oh, you know, they were afraid, but like they're reassured by like the Lord, by the prophets, by angels, by Christ, you know, to not be afraid. Whereas here it's like, oh, no, we can't understand. No one's going to tell us to anything. So we're just going to like, our mind is going to melt, or we're going to live in this like absolute state of demonic horror and presence.
Yeah.
And that's what I find so interesting about the genre. Not the, oh, there's a creepy face on the screen or a weird message on the room. Like, no, it's just a return to the fundamental human aspect, especially after the last 2 years, that there are things beyond our control that we have unfortunately messed with that have put us into a position where we can be terrified by things that easily do not make sense, that are told by those in charge, oh, no, everything's fine. It's the perfect form of horror entertainment, but also like really a cultural expression.
Yes.
Because it's not done by people that are, you know, it's not done by big studios. Like, I mean, the whole Backrooms thing, right? Like the whole Backrooms thing is this old weird copy pasta horror story, you know, like, oh, Room 106 bad ending, to where now like the 16-year-old kid with Blender is making a fantastic like alternate world.
Yeah, that what's his name? The K, it starts with the
8 pixels.
Yeah, like that. The some of the Backrooms ones gets like ruined with like monsters or whatever, but like the one that he put out recently was quite good, even though it was a monster thing where he goes in like the little like mock town, like a basically a Potemkin town. Yeah, like there was that one, also the strange like Infinity Town movie with Scott Pilgrim versus the world. No, that wasn't Scott Pilgrim. It was not Michael Cera. It was the other guy that looks like Michael Cera, the other like scrawny, like annoying. No, not Jonah Hill. It was like the film where he has like his GF. They're looking for a house, and they like, it was essentially like, I think they were either aliens or demons or something. They have to like raise a kid that's like a demon. And like they have the thing popping out of their neck, but like they can't escape this town because like every house is literally the same. God, what was it called? It was with like the one guy that looks like Michael Cera, but he's like more Jesse Eisenberg. Yeah.
There you go.
Social Network, Jesse Eisenberg. Yeah. Like, so him and his GF, they have to raise this kid who turns out to be either like an alien or a demon or something, and then like they discover that like they get liquidated after when their job is done, and like they eat like this fake food, and they live in this like fake place that goes on forever with nobody around. It's like really disturbing. Like, but yeah, so I think like the medical aesthetic is another like source of horrific intrigue. Like I remember there's this really like crappy film that I watched in theater. What was it called? The Chernobyl Diaries. Do you know that one?
Don't, but go on.
Yeah, it's like
Now I'm just interested.
yeah, it's like these kids, like I mean not kids, like these the usual like Chernobyl explorers that enter it like into the blue and yellow country for YouTube purposes illegally, and they like get caught by these again spiteful mutants. They get caught by these like colony of mutants that escaped this hospital that they've kept there since like the fall of the Soviet Union in like this like dungeon room, but they somehow escaped. I mean, it's a terrible movie, but like there's this one scene where they go into the basement of like near the basement of reactor 4, and they see that there's like a medical lab there, and they were experimenting on these like mutants that were turned by radiation. And then the blue and yellow country government comes and like sweeps everything up, and they like throw the survivors in this like irradiated dungeon with these mutants to get eaten, and basically they feed them tourists to like appease them. But like I remember like it wasn't so much that the film, because the film was like terrible, but it was like the whole like they're experimenting on these people, they're mutants, the government like is controlling them. It's like there's something about like that type of like ambiance that I like couldn't sleep the night I watched it. It was like years and years ago. Not too long ago, but like fairly long ago, like 2010s. But yeah, there's something like the analog horror is very interesting from like a nostalgic lens, because in some ways, like this is what I want to talk to you about. Like in some ways, analog horror, it's like the before time, because the internet, the relations of the internet is like total epistemological, ontological oblivion in terms of everything being exposed. I mean, there's still quite hidden. There's a lot of hidden things in the world, obviously. I mean, but in terms of the way in which we experience things, there's a greater awareness of things. And despite like the complaints that have started in the 2010s onwards of like kids being like subject to info overload and like people being constantly distracted, like distracting ourselves to death. I think there's an actual book called that. Not amusing ourselves. I mean, the Postman book, but there's also an essay or a book called Distracting Ourselves to Death. Or it could have been like a New York Times think piece, whatever. But nowadays, it's almost like we're comfortable in that. But analog represents, as a horror genre, the time of hiddenness, of found media, of analog having this weird mix of nostalgia and unsettlingness, like unsettlement, or how do I pronounce it? It's an unsettling vibe mixed with nostalgia, which is also why these like aesthetic image comps using like Caretaker music or using like various, glitch tunes, why they're so popular nowadays, because they're rooted, like the nostalgia is rooted with being a millennial and growing up in the mid 2000s and like the early 2000s, and like experiencing, like, say if you grew up in the Midwest, you grew up in like the sticks of Ontario, like aesthetically what it's like to be in like, I don't know, a playpen in the middle of like this warehouse type thing, and like to go to the mall and like to go to the dirt mall, and like there's the hallway that looks kind of creepy. It's like, but you had to be like a millennial in North America, but yet it still has like a powerful hold over you. So I think that's why analog horror is a growing sort of interest, because now it's almost like millennials want to like retcon their own experience as something more ominous than it was, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think it's because like you and I remember a time before smartphones. You and I are sort of like the last group of people that has a living memory of a time before the smartphone, before the iPhone debuts in 2007 and becomes ubiquitous. I mean, some people might want to say that the writing was on the wall, talking about the internet or ARPANET, and then the things that we've unleashed. Like, I know it's a refrain that you'll see on Twitter, like, oh, computers are demons or whatever. But
Yeah, it's
I
the
mean,
lens from which the demon comes in. Yeah.
right? And it does make me think that, yeah, you would want to retcon and say that, like, oh, we were at a time when things were foreboding, but we didn't know what we had unleashed. And maybe that's also like this aesthetic presentation of self-reflection, to where the millennial is somewhat aware of what they have unleashed. Like, I mean, like, there's a lot to say about generational infighting or just generational shit talking on one another, but like, let's face it, there's this like significant degree of older millennial narcissism that exists that has unleashed itself on the world, and I think the consequences on the Zoomers is like unspeakable and unfathomable in terms of what we've created, which is like hundreds of millions of like digital narcissists, and that nothing has survived, right? Like, I Lauren McIntyre and I joke about this, but I think that this is very true, that like in 1994 Nick Land wrote like a schizophrenic like slam poem called Meltdown.
Yes.
And it's more accurate than anyone I think dares to admit. I'm
true.
sorry, nothing will survive the near future, and I think that he's right.
No, but he is right though. I think that the sort of weird millennial narcissism, I think, comes from the same impulse of millennial nostalgia, in that we are the crossover generation. Like, crossover generations are always like slammed the hardest with various interesting mental deficiencies or like mental baubles that they sort of can't get over. Like, the millennial is still in some ways a crippled child, in that like we grew up in, like, again, like you were saying, that one meme with Doge. The one I like is I guess you could call it like post-fash wave or whatever, when they started to like do these image compilation, like image edits that were like not as on the nose, with like, the troops of the Austrian painter like saying we're back, that one, we're back. Like, there's this one that was a little girl playing in a field in front of the Twin Towers, and there was like, the typical glitch and like the mauve filter saying that the world you grew up in no longer exists. And as a millennial, I think more than even the boomers, we experienced the sort of closing, especially in North America, I think. I mean, I don't know, maybe in Europe it's similar, but the typical like North American, like closing the frontier. Millennials experienced that closing of the frontier, the transition from one world to the other, the closing of the world of our childhoods into this sort of like weird, like Kali Yuga world that we live in now with digital technology. And it's like, I think that produces a lot of different, unique like ways of looking at the world, but also it produces an immense amounts of like the inability to cope, which is why I think cope and is sort of like
this is where I think that you tumbled onto something that I think is just perfect, because you had mentioned the inability to cope, or that in North America we fundamentally had witnessed like the death of innocence, the death of the child, right? And I mean, what has that led to? Especially because we did grow up in a time of social media and this like unrelegated or unregulated, basically pat on the back, like go be yourself, kind of like hyper individualization, optimized through like marketplace, like what you consume is who you are type deal, right? Like Abercrombie and Fitch and whatever, like especially for women. But I mean, think about that in regards to media too, because what has like the really, and I think like this E:(R) did like the best sort of point about this, but it's just like you want to talk about films that have been nothing more than like millennials hitting the wall and are just like trying to create children's content or try to like make adult content in regards to children. And it's just like that's how you get like Turning Red, that's how you get Big Mouth, that's how you get all these things. And it's like, oh, it's meant to be irreverent and funny and edgy and a relatable story about growing up, but it's like your adolescence was almost 20 years ago. Like you didn't grow up. And like that's the problem.
I didn't grow up in Toronto, but I certainly grew up near Toronto, and like apparently like they got certain things wrong, but like I don't remember like it being as like quote unquote multi-cult as like the Turning Red film. Like, I mean, Canada like was still like similar to America in that point, but like there is unique things about like the Canadian Millennial. There's a lot of bad things about the Canadian Millennial, but people don't know this, but a lot of millennial youth culture was actually invented here in Canada, or was popularized. Like the emo thing, like the Hot Topic version of emo, not the Midwestern, like the actual good, the post-punk emo.
Oh, the good art code GF.
Yeah, yeah. That listens to Sunny Day Real Estate and mows her lawn at 5 a.m. That type of stuff. Listens to the Champs and listens to what's the football one called? The oh god, there's all these compilations of like Midwestern emo.
And this is the funny thing when I hear about cultural artifacts is because I didn't grow up with any of this. This was all secondhand to me.
Yeah, but that's like Gen X. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but what I mean though is it's just like when people. This is why I find culture the most interesting thing to talk about. And this is why I like following more culture commentary style stuff like you or Default Friend. Because like you guys are documenting things that like I just have no connection as, not because I'm like a rootless cosmopolitan, it's just because I was like an army brat. Like the idea of television was like stuff that like AFN would buy up or suck up that was like 2 or 4 seasons old. Your idea of the popular culture was whatever vestiges that you heard from America just months later. Like emo girls and what became scene and whatever was like a thing in middle school, but it was just like such a niche thing to people who were like had the ability to go travel back and forth. And like even then I have a video that's going to come out pretty soon because like Morgoth made an inspiration where he's talking about like the banality of British politics, and I was just like no, it's a fantastic vid, and I went on this
it's
long
Canada here as well, that's the same, but
it's like this long unscripted bit. It's just like as someone who lives in like the heartland of the empire, like I live in a time of sensory overload, and I really do long for that kind of banality again, but that would also mean that if in order to achieve that I would be pretty much culturally beholden to some kind of other imperial force. And I think that would actually make me more anxious. Like how anxious would it be right now as a Canadian or as a Brit or as a Frenchman, knowing that like American congressmen are talking up war rhetoric even though there's no formal declaration, and you're talking about arming a country to fight against a nuclear armed nation. Like this should be terrifying writ large to everybody.
Well, here in Canada, I actually am jealous of like American action politics or European, like where things are like literally like decided in the streets, but they're not truly decided in the streets. That's kind of like a fantasy. I mean, like in terms of the way that political discourse is shaped, because here in Canada, similar with Britain, like the media controls, like the state affiliated media controls discourse to such a degree that political parties are almost irrelevant. Like the only time there's ever been excitement is nowadays because Pierre Palavra has like a good chance of winning. Hopefully he does. But in some ways I don't want him to win because we don't deserve that. And he's like, in America, he'd be like considered like a normie con, like Marco Rubio type of, conservative. But like here, he's like labeled as like a far right, figure. But like when it comes to like, you are beholden to like this other apparatus of power. In the sort of like in Canada, there's like this perfect managerial state that controls all of life, and therefore, ergo, politics no longer becomes about the negotiation over what is the sort of like identity and being of a country itself, but rather politics becomes how can we efficiency max. And if you would like bring up any social or cultural issue that matters, then it's like that's gets shouted down pretty quickly. But about the war thing, like, as you know, in Canada, we have the largest diaspora of the blue and yellow people. And actually, the blue and yellow people, they helped create multiculturalism here in Canada way back in the day before Pierre Trudeau. There was this like weird, like, there was like these cultural theorists that talked about like how they interjected like a third culture, and therefore by default, Canada, not just the Anglophone and Francophone parts of Canada, but it was like from its foundation was a quote unquote multicultural experiment. And there was like this blue and yellow government sponsored like researcher that wrote these papers about it. And of course, our second in command here in Canada, Chrystia Freeland, who is also herself blue and yellow, and she, pissed off the Soviet Union when she was like one of these model UN like girl boss like in the making, teens, and the Soviet Union told her to piss off more or less, and she, of course, her grandfather was an Austrian painter enthusiast who worked with Bandera. And so now they're doing photo ops with the Marvel fan of Kiev. So, that's Canadian. So the concern over nuclear exchanges, of course, does not reach the ears of Freeland and Castru. So, yeah.
Well,
Castru.
Castru. Yeah, well, gotta make sure that everyone remembers the truth there. There are days though where like maybe this is where I talk about it more in the vid, but it's just like I really do wish I didn't have to deal with what I really do consider to be just this like Deleuzian schizophrenic deluge of just news, and that the body politic is energized at all times, at every second of the day, nonstop, and where I have to like be abreast of things that I didn't know were a thing. And the worst part is it's also just a matter of geography. Like, the United States is still like the third most populous country in the world, and one of the largest land masses in terms of a country. Like and it's just like both can't, won't, don't, whatever. Like it is a drain, I think, both mentally and spiritually, to just like I don't want to know at the same time. Like not to say that I shouldn't be willfully ignorant, but it's just, oh, I didn't know that this was like a thing going on in New York City for the last 6 months. No, I didn't know that this was a thing happening in like Montana that actually is going to affect the whole country. Like, where you do kind of long for the sort of banality of like Partygate, or that some politician's like father was like an Austrian painter appreciator or something like that. It's just no, but at the same time, it's just like I live in the middle of the country. I feel it many a time that it's just like an occupied space, and I'm beholden to the same crazy guys you are, and so it just gets to be this like weird sensation as an American, where you're just like, oh, the anti-Americanism sometimes that you hear, you're like, yeah, like, so it's justified, but at the same time, it's just like, oh fuck, like you're a part of this country whether you like it or not. This is where it's like where people say you should live like an expat in your own country, and it's like, well, how can you? Like, I can't just buy a plane ticket and leave. Like it doesn't. I mean, I can, but I
can't buy a plane ticket and leave here. Still.
Well, that's we got to find a way to smuggle you out, but it's just like I can't pick up a plane ticket and go anywhere that would remotely feel like I'm with people that would like, or have a government that would be remotely open to me. Like not to go all Reagan-esque like with his time for choosing speech, but it's just like, yeah, this is kind of it.
Well, I mean, if that one guy in Eastern Europe ends up winning, I don't know. No, sorry. It's incredibly hard to smuggle rubles into Canada, by the way. I mean, I have to wait forever. But they have to they have to hollow out a book, and they have to send it through the mafia. It's incredibly difficult. The Kremlin has a very hard job giving geo rubles in Canada. But so no, but I know what you mean. Like it is like the whole expat in your own country thing. Like the material reality. I know the material reality meme, but like the material like condition of it is that, like you were saying, like, okay, live like an expat in your own country, but the regime can still like mess with you. Like oh, but what if you're a homesteader? Yeah, but it's true. Like if you live in a community that is somewhat immune, if you live in a state that is like somewhat immune from this, like ironically enough, like Utah is almost ideal for this because they have their own like, the Mormons have their own separate way of doing things, but like, it's like, yeah, the sort of like the Eye of Sauron can still like mess with you. Like it's still like, even if you were to become like a legitimate expat, there's like a ton of like drawbacks with that as well, because like a lot of these like expat communities, like they like, first of all, the governments, if like things like really go wrong, they like don't care about you because you're just like an American, who cares, right? But also like these expat communities, they can be like they have their own like weirdo sort of like political concerns they have to deal with, from what I hear. And it's like, it's not like this fantasy of like, oh well, I could just be an expat in like, you know, Belize or wherever. Like it's not as simple as that, from what I hear.
I think Hemingway is idealized too much in that regard. But like
Yeah.
that's the other thing is that even if you did want to go full, you know, homesteader off grid thing, I mean, there's so many other like societal and institutional bottlenecks that you would have to deal with.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that I like really have started to like get really sort of like woke on, is just like the medical field is like, that's it, right? It's do or die, not just because of the last 2 years, but just because
In general.
well, in general, exactly. Like and this is where I immediately think about just like nothing and I it's weird growing up in a time where like you're not keen to maybe some of the more like racialized politics that now exist in your face in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And it's just like you didn't really grow up with it. I grew up in places where like I was a minority all the time until now. And it's just like, oh, you know, like it would be terrifying to just be like, you know, I think about like nursing homes and things like that. And it's just like, yeah, the medical field is
I
like,
know what you're getting at. Yeah.
yeah, right. Like the medical field is really something that I think that is the bottleneck here, because if I mean, I watched in Dallas County the same thing that happened in parts of like Missouri and New York City, where it was just like we're going to have like basically a racialized triage for like monoclonal antibody treatment, to where, you know, like if you don't have a pre-existing condition, like white guy seeks back of line. And
yeah
like I wouldn't have gotten monoclonal antibody treatment in Dallas County if I had not had a kidney transplant. Like it's simple as.
Yeah.
And I like does not. I think that that's something that needs to be realized. Is like you know, like I think it was Luca Cacciatore or someone who had made a tweet where it's just like every dissident Twitter account says like the same 5 things about how they lie to you and how they want you dead. And I'm like, well, all of that's true. And I mean, I think like the sides are as clear as day. And that's the thing though, is like with either expat in your own country or even expat abroad, it's just like you're not going to get access to things. So it gets very Darwinian, where it's just like you're either fit or you're just not going to make it.
Well, that was Agamben's point about exclusion being the model of biopower rather than active oppression and the sort of like liberal managerial state.
And that's where we're at, is that it is the bureaucratized system of exclusion, to where I think in the United States, the government had talked about wanting to provide more financial incentives to like Medicaid providers, that if you work with our Medicaid system, we'll give you more money if you come up with this like racial equity plan. And like that's just, you know, coded language for like, you know, just more Gibbs for the Gibbs god. And it's just, you know, this is something I think that is this movement or whatever this like weird political space that we occupy in starts to gain more institutional attention, that I think that people like, you know, the guy who wrote First Do No Harm or Dr. Ben Braddock, they all need to be like front and center in this discussion.
Yeah. Even like the whole well, it's pertinent now because of the time recording, like where we're just like that happened in Buffalo.
Man.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate about the glow in the dark thing, but like, I don't know. There's still a lot of weird things going on. Not this like let's face it. You don't actually need glowies. You just need like really incredibly stupid people and very, very impressionable people with certain neurodivergent disorders to like get hooked up to like the wrong sort of like meme plexes, and to not realize that a lot of these things have an incredible amount of irony to them. And so it's not like the like edgelord like Chan culture like Paul Cell type of stuff. It's not that discourse that's bad in general. Like this is where these leftoid bread tubers that talk about stochastic T-word and radicalization pipeline, it's not the content itself, it's rather the type of people exposed to it they don't realize the irony behind it. Like there is true sentiment. Like there is like a lot of people on the far right on the internet who like, you know, I mean, I don't have to explain it, but like there still is like a sort of like meta irony of like, yeah, but like this is like a space of discourse, and it would be ideal if one day society could reflect our like Austrian painter fantasies. But for now, it's like it's online. It's like online irony shitposting. But I mentioned that because it's where am I getting with this point? Oh yeah, about like the for example, like the whole the with the decision and talking about the birth rates and demographic changes. Like in America, I do find it abhorrent that like if you want to have a kid, like to actually have a kid, the cost of like say if there's like an at-risk pregnancy, or even like the cost of just delivering a kid in general is like penalizing, right?
The thing that you had mentioned in regards to both just medical, but like also but like I have found that recent like the discourse around this issue, like and it's framed so fundamentally as like, oh, herder Christ cucks, whatever. Like it's very frustrating. Where it's just like we're fundamentally okay based upon certain categories of things that we would want to keep this morally and ontologically evil thing to still happen because it conveniently keeps certain groups in a position to where they are today, whereas
they don't around 13.
Around 13 to 12.6%, right? Whatever fits your convenient meme statistic of FBI crime statistics, but like
I said in that post, we need a 1350 project.
but we should though, like in all honesty, like I find it to be absolutely abhorrent in the United States that from the Great Society onwards that America more or less in the name of progress, which really isn't in the name of progress, it was in the name of creating a permanent client class, to take an apocryphal quote from a former American president, to have them voting a specific way for the next 200 years, that we destroyed
have those gamer words voting for
right, and that we destroyed like black middle income, black upper class, except for a small percentage. We destroyed two family households, the nuclear family, like jobless, all of that. Like that was like, you want to see what cultural looks like, if you're remotely concerned.
Censor that for whatever you do.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No problem.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
But like, if you're really concerned about what the state can do to you, you should be examining the post-1965 world to that community.
And what the state can do to you as a political project.
Well, I'm sorry, like that's already happening now. Like we live in a world where like the Sackler and all of that crap, where they're typing pillbillies and emails about addicted people in West Virginia. I'm sorry, like it's already happening now. And you should be looking at what they've done or try to like resist and their counter movements and counteraction as a way to do it. I just, and again, like it's just that's something that I think that keeps in mind. And you mentioned current events, and this is where I think like the lefty bread tube shitlib type commentators, when they criticize right wingers about, oh, you have an obligation to your audience, I actually think that's a very valid criticism. Because just in the way that a certain gender affirming clinic in the United Kingdom has been getting flack for targeting a disproportionate number of autistic people.
Oh, wow. Wow. You mean those memes on that certain anime forum about certain online moderators of certain forums who have certain neurodivergent disorders and a certain identity crises that go hand in hand, that they were right?
Yeah, heaven forbid the UK government confirms your Janny memes.
The T word Janny meme.
Yeah, the T word Janny memes.
Oh boy.
Sorry.
Yeah, but go ahead. Shout out to Mary Harrington, by the way.
God bless her.
God bless Mums Nat.
I need to get her to follow me, because I have Helen Andrews already following me. I'm just like slowly collecting my list of blue check marks.
Based, yeah.
But well, like you have that, but like the right has memed in its memeplexes also just through irony, but also I think just by the sheer growing number of diagnostic tools that are available. Like, we do attract a certain number of atypical and neurodivergent types of individuals.
Oh God,
that I think if you were to meme something to a point where someone could read a certain book about what a lot of medieval castles went under during that kind of conflict, that they might actually take action. And we do, I know for certain, after like doing IRL meetups and things, that there are very living definitions of the asocial, overly online internet schizoid that you don't want to be doing things.
Yeah.
And like, if there's anything that has come out from the news, and again, it's all unfolding. This all could age like, cheese or like, milk in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks. But like, if whatever that person said is true about being on certain Mongolian basket weaving forums as a teenager, then like, yeah, that's a legit thing that we should probably be a little more mindful of. And I do think that criticism is actually correct in a lot of ways. Whereas like the left's, bread tube shitlib thing, like their sort of like consideration to their audience is talking about how to get smuggle the Chinese hormonal therapeutics into their children's breakfasts. So I mean, like, we have two vastly different like sociological problems that can create massive social contagion like events like what we've seen on the news to like generate state action, but we know that state action only goes one way.
No, exactly. Same with censorship only going one way. I mean, this is old hat.
Exactly.
But that's what I mean. Like, how many lives has Vaush probably destroyed through his, like, there was a picture I saw today on Twitter, where this guy in a military exercise in his like platoon unit in like the Harrier or wherever he's gonna drop off from in the paratrooper division, he's like has his like smartphone. He's like watching a Vaush stream, and I'm like, you couldn't have like a better illustration of like modern like GAE power than that. Like, I mean, that is like mind-blowing in terms of like a dialectical image, because it represents like so much to me. Like, it's kind of like that one other image of like the wall, what was it? It's I think the account is called Mytho American, which is run by a friend of ours, by the way, who I'm going to actually interview on this podcast, where he posts like these aesthetic images of America, like usually Midwestern, like.
Yeah, I follow him. He's great.
Yeah. The one where it's like a mall or something, but it's like one of those like Trompe d'Oeil of like clouds in the sky, but then there's like the cracks in like the ceiling tiles. So It's like you could see like the hole in the sky of the firmament to the other side, and the other side is like industrial, like, labyrinth of like pipes and usual stuff you'd find in industrial parks, like, pipes and wiring. But it's like such a poetic image, I think, of like the sort of like illusion of like, it's very like Truman Show-esque, where like, Truman goes out to the sea and like there's the wall and it's like, the dome. It's like very much like a representation, I think, of like the sort of like the fundamental like unreality to everything. Like the fact that like, a literal like stormtrooper of the regime can like have a Vaush stream while he's doing training is like, wow, that's kind of like, I don't know, we're screwed, bro. We're done for. Like, these people, if there's ever like total martial law, like Alex Jones fantasy, I wonder if like they'd be more or less hesitant to deal with unruly guys in pickup trucks and John Deere hats and Bushmasters. I wonder what's gonna like the negotiation process with that is going to be in this Alex Jones Cholskausen fantasy world of.
I would genuinely be both horrified but really interested to find out. Oh, like I remember during like the Bundy Ranch thing in Utah.
Yeah.
And you saw on Twitter all the time like jihadists or whatever.
Y'all Qaeda was the good.
Yeah, that one too. God, just what a different time. And where you get nostalgic for what lefties would call you like 5 years ago.
man. Yeah.
And like, but like, I can't help but think like, what would that be like now in the age of like the Twitch stream addled Zoomer that has like a perma rent a cop job or whatever,
Oh
and like,
God.
just like, how do you negotiate?
They're stimming while they have like their like AR variant in their hand. They're like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh God, well, that'd be interesting. But no, there was one by Mytho America that I was just that made me remember sort of what you were talking about. Not just that one, but like he had this great piece or this great image that he had tweeted out where it was the picture of like the dead bald eagle, and in the backdrop is just like a bunch of windmills.
Oh God.
And,
oh man, that's brutal. That's brutal.
Yeah. But I mean, and it's funny because it's just like that picture could have been taken anywhere in the places that I work at, IRL. Like every Monday, I go on this like long drive cross county to go pick up like farebox cash and money and in document forums, and I just see like these rolling fields of green farmland and pastures and like sort of that pastoral rural America, like, you know, petty nationalism that a lot of like guys will fantasize about.
Shire
but, like, I actually
nationalism,
live, yeah, the Shire nationalism that I actually live in, and it has its own ups and downs, but like there's always that disgusting tendril of like what I can almost call modernity's arousal of just like these jutting you know, windmills all over the place that just like
that's something that like Robert Hughes would talk about with certain architectural styles in America. He had that before he died in 2007. He had the series called American Vision, where it covered like the development of art in America. And, you know, Robert Hughes had that very like, you know, detached Australian, like sardonic, like the sort of like the American arousal of like the obelisk-esque, like phallic windmill that is like erect upon the landscape. Like, I wonder like if there is some symbolism there. It seems that like, but yeah, go ahead. What do you mean by like modernity's arousal? Do you mean like the false promise of certain elements of the modern world being intuited as like something deeply erotic, or do you mean that the eroticism is sort of hijacked into this like greater apparatus of power?
I think that the eroticism of it, and like it juts out. I mean, it's phallic. It's in a place where it shouldn't be.
It's shiny.
Almost. Well, sure, but like what I mean by it is like it is aroused in the ability to seep into places that it shouldn't be, as if almost it is all encompassing, penetrating, and almost as if it is to violate what is a natural and sacred space. I wish I could show you where I live and just, you know, show you this farmland and what feels very pastoral in these like small towns of like, you know, like 1,000 some odd people, but like these one road towns where there's like a dozen different churches. And yet in the backdrop, you're just fundamentally aware that this world has been violated in some sense, where like there's the windmills. There's the, you know, billboard for like the upcoming solar processing thing. Oh, this lot of land is for sale, but it's beyond anyone who lives there. You know, it's out of their price range because the areas around here are experiencing the metastasization of the urban tumor. Yeah. Because urban sprawl never goes upward. It always goes horizontal.
Yes.
So where now, because of how America is designed, and I mean, our good friend Apex has written about the car, which is one of his best essays. And, you know, we're such a car dependent country that people in America would rather suffer through an hour and a half traffic commute, which is detrimental to their mental health, but also their physical health, if it means that they don't live in the city.
Yeah.
And, you know, all that this does is that it prices out the people that grow your food or that supply your meat to the butcher shop or whatever. And I know that sounds like, you know, I'm basically sort of like reiterating sort of like they tore down heaven and put up a parking lot type situation, but it's just like it's a very real thing that's still happening in America. Like the fundamental thing that I think Nick Land also got right now that he moved like to that sort of neo-reactionary space, since we talked about him earlier, was that, you know, he talked about this in the best part of the Dark Enlightenment, which I think is called, which is the Cracker Factory. Like, that's the best part of that entire bit, where he basically says that like the fundamental like Anglo-American ideal about resolving problems has always been exit. Whether it's from, you know, what was it, like William Rogers basically getting kicked out for advocating for separation of church and state. So like, you know, exit, right? Like just go and do your own thing. And I mean, that dies in 1865 for obvious reasons. It gets codified permanently with freedom of association dying in 1965. And just like even now, right, like there's sort of this mythos that somehow we can escape to the small town, to the boonies, to the rural area, to that backwoods town in Arkansas, but you can't. And what makes the arousal of modernity even worse is that its arousal isn't just like a physical phallus shaped, like, you know, erect thing that you would see in like a skyscraper or a wind turbine, but it's also the thoughts of modernity, its own modern lust and whatnot. Because like I mentioned earlier, like you know, if a South Afrikaner can speak in perfect Americanized English in downtown Pretoria, then there's really no escape from it. I mean, I live in a place, and I think I mentioned this on the Fed post or in a video or something, where I live in a place where kids can still like ride a horse to the local park or high school. And it doesn't matter when they're literally using Zoomerisms in their language, or they all have that distinct androgynous sort of, you know, processed food, low T diet because of the American situation, which is really now a Western problem. It's not just American, but like, and they all look the same. They all kind of have the same interest in culture and haircut. They're all following the same accounts. It's just like, you know, modernity is this inescapable thing. And this is where, just to sort of like maybe wrap up this like bit of thought thinking, is this just like, I think this is where Curtis Yarvin was right when he wrote about Killing the Ghosts, that today's problems aren't a conflict of pre-modernity versus modernity. It is the problem of modernity versus post-modernity. And this is why I love seeing liberals like James Lindsay get so upset about postmodern rightists. You know, he called Alex Kashuta like a year ago a postmodern trad.
Oh my god! Like, you know where Alex, you know, not to toot my own horn, but why can't James Lindsay just name the Geo? Why can't he do this? I mean, like,
well, you know,
yeah. Anyways, speaking of postmodern rightists, but no, go ahead,
right?
Go ahead, yeah.
Oh yeah. But like, that's the thing is that there's plenty. This is why I find it interesting when like right wingers get really upset, or even liberals get upset when postmodern analysis is being used on the current problems of modernity, because it's just like the managerial system that has been so accurately described and called out by more or less everybody now. And I mean, shit libs would call it democratic elitism, but let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're applying postmodern and structural analysis to things that do require structural analysis, and we need to create some sort of, to borrow a programming term, like a complex adaptive system in order to survive and understand how the heck we're going to make it through this tumultuous nightmare, that's both digitized but also very real. Because there is no separation between the meat space and the digital anymore.
Well,
I mean, like
the input-output mechanism of the digital is,
it's terrifying, because like at any point in time, unless you deliberately cut yourself off from it, and I know a few guys in my parish who do, and if I didn't live this online double life, I'd probably be like them, where they have dumb phones. They purposefully have phones that don't have like internet capability, or they don't have apps on them. It's literally for texting and sending out mass messages or calling people. That's it. Which I think is like the smart thing to do. But to sort of like put a nub on this point here is like, with this new right, which is this sort of funny term that we have to say because there's, Paul Gottfried's suggestion got ruined by our certain well-coiffed individual. But,
well-coiffed individual. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
our well-coiffed individual with a tint of radium. But we understand that maybe this analysis is worthwhile, and that we want to take away something from it. And we understand how power operates on a level that is beyond sort of the 19th century conceptualizations, and that we're in a position that, okay, we understand how power works. We're familiar with things like biopower and biopolitics. Like, these things are very real. The last 2 years especially have demonstrated that beyond all capability of understanding. And maybe we should do something about it in a way that will allow us to survive. Because I don't think that, like with that certain court decision that got leaked, right? Because we're on YouTube. The whole conversation about, like, well, this isn't going to solve maybe a fertility problem. No, like, you should be understanding that, like, biopower is far more complex than just a child. It's about our culture. It's about the fundamental aspect that we have now created medical tools that put the ability to make reproductive decisions within our own aspect of agency, and that now translates into structural liberation, and how that affects, like, civilizations and the identity and makeup of a country, to where now, like, oh, it's an idea that anyone can be a part of. And the reason why it's an idea is because we have fundamentally altered the way that we understand our own biology, because now we can in a way that is far beyond anyone's comprehension, maybe even a century ago. And I get it. Oh, the ancient Romans did things to do that. Yeah, and they made that plant go extinct. But, like, here it's a completely different situation, and I think that's why the conflict of today isn't going to be petty nationalism or, like, pastoral escapism that we
return Vuvern,
return with the V, or sort of that I really like wheat fields kind of deal,
which itself is a weird erotic sexual fantasy as well.
Well, yeah, right. And that's
I pissed a lot of people off with that.
I'm sure that I don't care, right? Like, my own, I grew up in places where I was a minority my whole life. I'm totally screwed in that regard. Like, in-group, out-group preference, what's that? But that's why I do think that really this conflict that we're in is a battle between who can harness post-modernity ideas and mechanisms of action to survive what modernity is still reaping upon the modern world.
Right, because we live in a state of hypermodernity. I mean,
yes,
like John David Ebert, well, even before, like, Zygmunt Bauman is the best resource for that. But it's funny, like, about, you mentioned there's a lot of things there. Certain, like, very out there, like, postmodern, like, I would say, like, femcel academics, they will, like, readily admit that the current issue of human life, that certain procedure, that it is a form of what Foucault called governmentality, of the administration of whole bodies of peoples in a society. So in a way, it's like the administration of populations and statistics of populations is ensured through the mechanism, but they then go and say, well, that's a good thing because of, like, the rhetoric around the certain procedure is like, I think even, like, some I think it was like that terrible Bostiak guy, I think, or someone was saying about it, like, after when he stream sniped the, my last appearance on, Follow the Rules. He's like, well, like, these leftoids, they, like, talk about, like, how it's vital to women's, health, and it's like it ensures like every like liberal good you could think of. It ensures freedom, it ensures progress, it ensures racial equality, which is really weird if you know the history of that certain organization, lobby group in America, and who founded it, Margaret Sanger. All of these sort of, like, conjectures come from, and this is where James Lindsay is, like, at least partially right, but although he doesn't realize the full implication of it, is that it does come from, like, this academic jargon where now, like, instead of, like, the old 80s culture war around this particular issue, now it's like this thing of, like, it's vital to racial equality and women's health and the livelihood of women and blah, 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 and economic equality and environmental equality as well, because there's this weird intersection between antinatalism and extreme, like, more mainstream, like, version of, like, Extinction Rebellion environmentalism, and like, the sort of normalization of, like, I would call it, like, casual pop nihilism. It's like, Zoomers watching TikTok videos instead of, like, reading Thomas Ligotti or whatever. Like,
Man, we're so close to Zero HP Lovecraft's Green New Deal. Like,
Yeah, the Green New Deal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, oh my God. Like, no, but like, so you mentioned America is like this horizontal place. It's funny because Baudrillard said this in America. The book, his travel log, which I highly recommend everyone reading. I did a video on it, a live stream. Um, I think like America is horizontal for a reason, but like you were saying, it again repeats this like closing of the frontier thing where now like these apparatuses of governmentality, now they're designed to close certain frontiers. And I think like the current court decision is like almost like a delicious and weird regression of the standard narrative of things. Because here in Canada, like this is why I hate to say it, like as much as I don't want to like leave people behind, as much as I know that like for rightly or wrongly you should feel some sense of obligation to like your home and your nation. Canada, like the certain issue we're talking about, it's basically a form of religious worship. I'm like it's literally like Moloch, child sacrifice. Because what did Castro do in the beginning of like when people were like flipping their shit over this thing? He's like, I'm going to give funding your tax, because it's covered by the taxpayers here in Canada, by the way, up till like literally till the day of delivery, if you can find a doctor that wants to do that. He's like, we're going to give money to like to virtue signal to make it easier and accessible. And Chrystia Freeland's like, this is the fabric of our nation, is the women's right to choose. It's like, okay, this is the fabric of the Canada as in, post nation. And so to me, it's like, there's a lot of like, when like these leftoids, they talk about, they take that Patrick Bateman meme about like ontological evil. That literally is like the being of evil, because you are, at least in my worldview, but I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm saying like the horizontal nature is everywhere. Like it's the media, it's everything. It's like everything is easily graspable and everything is on its surface and everything is like interconnected in like this sort of horizontal, eminent, like rhizomatic form in America in particular. Because Europe, like this is what Baudrillard says, Europe is plagued by like the hierarchy of like their own history and their own politics and their own like, he said they're sort of like slouching in modernity. Well, maybe not nowadays because, they've been heavily Americanized. But, in the time of being in the 80s, like they were sort of quote unquote slouching in terms of like hypermodernity because they have the weight of their own history, which necessitates certain ways of thinking and certain like means of difference. Whereas like in America, nothing is different. Like everything is like literally the same. He goes, it doesn't matter if you're going like down the street and like going to an ATM in like a the side of like the parking lot from like the 7-Eleven to like going to the Rocky Mountains or going to like some kind of like post Route 66 bauble on the side of the road. It's literally like every part of America is singularly in itself as like this pyramidian whole, where it's like, you could just touch one part of America and it's like the same. It's like, that's America. Whereas in Europe, it's like everything is different, well, up until recently with, the current thing. But like, so even like the sort of like culture war politics that were cemented around this one particular issue became like the operational model for it. Like even that in itself is like part of like quote unquote hypermodern Americana. Because like, like we've never, in a way we've moved on, but in a way we didn't move on from like, Wally George and like Morton Downey Jr. Like then that became like Bill O'Reilly, and then that became like, Bill O'Reilly versus Keith Olbermann. Now it becomes like Hassan versus, I don't know, Joe Rogan. It's like that's no, I shouldn't say the Hassan versus like, I don't know, Sargon. Like it's like like that sort of culture war model is still in America. It's still there, even though it's like a much different form of it. But like the pattern is the same. It's like firing line, Morton Downey Jr. Now we have like Twitch streamers versus YouTube celebrities. and it's
Yeah.
like, like
Well, and it's funny that you had mentioned the medical thing that we've been talking about in regards to that decision, because like I who was it? I think it was Janet Yellen, right, with the Federal Reserve, that had said that this would like substantially impact the economy.
yeah, the
And
Freakonomics
that
thing, yeah.
well that well not just the Levitt thing, right, which has its own issues that I think Steve Saylor has thoroughly hit on the head, but like
Yeah.
but no, she says that this would like have a drastic and negative impact on the economy, and I'm sure that she's referring to like childcare costs or welfare or whatever argument that you want to use about social ills. But I can't help but think of the more like ominous meaning behind that, like negative economic consequences. And it's just like, have we truly bureaucratized? Not to rip too much from Red Scare, but have like we really turned procreation into another aspect of like sexual bureaucracy to where now, well, I mean, that's what we are, but I mean,
can imagine. I was actually like, when you said that, I envisioned Anna's voice saying that. Well, it like turned it into sexual bureaucracy. Like, no, sorry, that's Dasha. I'm sorry. I can't do the Anna Kachai.
I can't either. I do listen to them, which it
turned it into this weird form of sexual bureaucracy. And then Dash is like, yeah, but that's like like risking getting pregnant is so hot. Like yeah, I know it's so hot, but like we've turned it into a form of biopower, like
well, that right, but
I'm trying
but
to
also,
do the voice.
you're trying real hard, and I'm trying also to keep a straight face. But like that's the other thing is that one, it is a form of sexual bureaucracy. They're 100% right. But secondly, what kind of point have we done? It's almost like when you like go in a circle or you go so far in one direction, you end up right where you started, right? Where like we've come to a point where the idea of the woman as agency, the woman as a being to reproduce and give life. And you've gone so far to where, for economic reasons, you are contained in this hyper-modern box that, no, breeding is a kink. You're supposed to have
I've talked about this so much. It's true.
And like breeding is a kink.
Yeah.
It's not a thing that is natural.
Exactly.
And if you are to engage in it, there will be severe economic consequences. Like there's this funny little animated video on YouTube about like buying a new phone, where like the woman goes, "This phone sucks." And this guy's like, "Well, you should just buy a new one." And like she just looks at him with this like sarcastic wide-eyed look and like has a new phone in her hand. And, like she swipes her card and it's like, "Your card was declined." And like the video ends. And it's just like, that's where I think that a lot of this like conversation about like negative economic consequences is like, so like women are part of a spreadsheet. Breeding, or I hate that word, like it's gotten to a point where like that Orrin McIntyre tweet where like progressives will like come up with sexual traditionalism and they'll like have a eureka moment or whatever. That's where we're at. Is it's just like we are trying to find through economic and biopower means just like the capability to ensure that having children and being mindful that the next time that you decide to go to the bar could be your last, it's gonna have negative, like, and it reinforces the millennial fear,
anxiety
that I can't afford a kid. And I mean, like, it's structurally stacked against you, I think, in a lot of ways.
I even tweeted like that. A lot of like these millennial women, they'll literally become asexual instead of like risking having a child, which is like,
well, and when they say asexual, but at the same time, like there's this like really weird, I think, and I'm talking out of my ass, so this is like a gut feeling. So like if I'm wrong, by all means, your commenters will tear me to a new one. But like, I do think that like that you have that as like the asexual thing, but like the other path, right, that they go on is that like the idea of being impregnated, like actual, consensual, loving relations with somebody for the purposes of having a child, has now become so hypersexualized that like modern woman and also modern man, let's face it, men are
Yeah.
just as screwed. Like
Submissive
this is
and
not
breedable, yeah.
the submissive and breedable thing, but like men are equally fucked. Like men, like it's weird when I listen to men online or even in real life talk about like women. Like there was this thing that made me feel like really uncomfortable. Like someone had sent me a video of like the YouTube review guy Maxor or whatever, and like he's funny, but like there was this line in there where he's just like, I really like it when women hit me, and I was just like, what am I supposed to break down from that? Like we've come to a point where the
femdom is like acceptable.
well, yeah, like it's so prevalent, but not just in turn. Like we see it all the time, and like you mentioned it in your talk with Crooner. Like I really liked it because like he's also made this point that I think about the mother that is just also something that we see today, where it's just like I don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of tits. I love them.
Oh,
they're
me
great.
too. Yeah,
they're wonderful.
but I don't like. I don't really care. Like, I mean, if a woman,
I don't get. But I also don't like the mommy milkers meme. I really don't like it. I find that to be a weird, hyper online,
it's
like
infantilization, really.
Infantilization of man, to where it's just like, give me, you know, like the infamous Milky tweet, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What a way to go down in history. But like,
wait, who was that? Was it Hanania or was it who did that? Well, Nemitz did that one.
Nemitz did it.
Yeah.
And I think that everyone from Kovefe and on to Zero HP Lovecraft has done it at least once or twice.
Yeah.
And
that came from the 4chan ship post where it's like, mommy, Milky now. no, it's Tendies, it was Temmie's.
Yeah, Tendies now. Although the one benefit of the deep fake is that you can now get like a Ben Shapiro vocode to like that shitpost copy pasta in regards to his sister. I just find that funny. But like even terrible. Her as the object, with both a sort of like ethnic animus, but also just because like tits. And
it's a weird version of those novels in that One Nation in the Middle East in the 70s where it had like the Austrian painter regime, like the women in the certain camp, you know, those type of yeah.
And it just, but like that's the thing is like I say this knowing that there is a very fine line that is also very blurred between the real and the digital.
Yeah,
and like there are very few people that I know IRL that I would consider normal, like that aren't affected by this stuff or that are aware of it, but like they're also well put together with like wives and kids. And yet at the same time, considering how high the age of marriage is nowadays in the West, like it is a big part of like modern matchmaking. And I think that this is true based on my past history, but also like with Gen Z especially, is a lot of modern matchmaking going to be nowadays nothing more than just people who have similar porn search history.
Man, you really did like the Crooner interview. Because like he talked about like LARPing, like how the e-girl LARPs as your fantasy trad waifu.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I've only watched like the first hour of that talk.
Oh yeah. I think
so whatever else you guys mentioned, I did not hear it all.
Yeah, but well, go and watch it. Like I think it's true though, because from what I know, like from Zoomers that have written about themselves, like they're very like they don't have the same like party or socialization that like millennials did. Like the college party is almost dead. Like they have a tight-knit group of friends that are quote unquote diverse. They have like online interests, and they don't like they experience moments together online rather than like IRL. And like it's funny because like when I was doing research, I actually came across like Psychology Today articles and stuff about these various like porno tropes, and also like, you know, Reddit. I mean, we all beef on Reddit, but like for like certain like finding niche things of like people telling on themselves, then like it's a good resource. But even like when you go and like seek out this content, there are two themes when it comes to the impregnation thing. There's the obvious one, which is like kind of like, I don't want to say like violating consent because of course it's just a fantasy, but it's like you sort of like, oh no, I'm not on birth control, oh my god, but it's like then you have like, you know, you accept it, right? Which, to be fair, like I know this sounds quite like un-PC, but a lot of eroticism was kind of like that before the sort of like 20, like what default calls like 2010 sexuality of like consent, like again liberal contractual based relations among people, where it's like, you know, you every step of the way you have to declare, yes, I consent. Like a lot of seduction and eroticism was basically the premise of like you resist and then you give in, but through that resistance it's like the heightening of eroticism, which nowadays is a very alien, very un-PC, very like, you know, cancelable thing to talk about. So I'm talking about this as purely clinical sociological lens, right? I mean nothing by it, right? So there's one point which is obviously an older model, but there is a trend within the impregnation pornography where the woman now is the one who decides. The woman pins the man down, and she's like, and he's like, no, you're not on birth control. And it's like, oh, fuck. And it's like, there is that sort of like that deterrent of the dominant sexual relation. It is no longer the man almost semi-forcing impregnation. Now it's the woman semi-forcing the man who is basically just the sperm donor, and with all of like the responsibilities that it implies through the legal system and so forth. Like there's this very like weird inversion that's happening within various porno tropes, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I think that also it also goes down along like racial lines as well.
Oh,
like there was that weird TikTok thing that was going around the other day on Twitter about the like woman on the piano doing that weird song about being like Jewish and European and whatever. And like I just can't help but think to myself that at this point, you know, like what is it, like, you know, politics, you know, politics and sex, right? Just it all coincides, and like are at a point where everyone is so online, and the online forces you into a digital political box, and that also has connotations for how you're going to express yourself as a human being with needs and sexual interests.
Exactly.
I mean, like we've gotten to a point now, both by I think human physiology, just based on like well-documented falling T levels, and the fact, and I wrote about this on my Substack, like Hometown Longhouse, where I was just like watching this like skinny, shrimpy kid, manlet type guy, and like being surrounded by like fat, tall women, just bossing him around at this Chick-fil-A. And I was like, no wonder. Yeah, I really recommend that everyone read it. It's called Hometown Longhouse. And I just like,
what a title. Hometown Longhouse.
I'm a clever guy now and then. I'm an idiot, but I come up with some interesting things.
That could be like an album cover. That could be like a post.
It should be. It's called the Hometown Longhouse, or Observations from Chick-fil-A. I like to think of myself that maybe one day, like in a former life, I could have been like one of those niche culture writers in like the 1980s about what's happening in New York.
Could have been like Tom Wolfe. Yeah.
I could have been Tom Wolfe, or like what Michael Malice could have been. It's just like it's just like I'm you know, but like that's my flights of fancy of my days of wishing I could go back to writing or theater work, but like that ain't never gonna happen. But like I just watched this kid get pushed around and like get ordered, and like there was no woman, I think, except some like stout Mexican chick that was like the same height he was. And I was like, do you really think that this guy has traditional normal male sexual interests of like taking a woman and making her his? Like, no, that guy probably fantasizes about one of those tall, you know, like Final Fantasy VIII vampire tall chicks beating the shit out of him before something happens to him,
licking the ass.
And I'm like we've come to a point where right, oh
shout
god,
out to
yeah.
A, shout out to A.
Shout out to Academic Asian on tomboy ab licking. But it's all there, right? Like we've met the inverse of the sex.
Yes.
Where that's where we're at now. And it, like, you know, because of the pill, and because of these certain medical sacraments that the progressives hold up for Moloch sacrifice, that, there is no male control over these spaces anymore.
No, never.
Like that's why
that's verboten. Male sexuality is demonized.
Yeah, heaven forbid males express themselves in ways that are normal and healthy.
And I don't mean like the sort of like borderline creepy, like certain like manosphere grifters that talk about it. I mean like genuinely. I don't mean like the meme of like male sexuality is demonized, ergo I should like go with
sleep with everybody.
Sleep with 15-year-old girls. Like, it's like I don't mean that. I mean like genuine male, even expressions of male sexuality, or sexuality or eroticism from the male perspective is verboten and demonized. Yeah.
Well, exactly, to a point now where it's demonized and men don't have, I think, a particular space outside of the online, which only reinforces them down a path to where, like, I do genuinely think that because of the number of men who aren't having sex anymore, that's a problem. I do genuinely think that that's changed our social dynamic forever. Yeah. And I mean, like, you throw that into the mix and you throw pornography and its access into the mix, the abdication of parental responsibility. Like, I've heard stories from male friends that are just like, yeah, like I lost my virginity at 16 or 17 years old, but because of porn, I didn't climax my first time. And it's just like, how the fuck do we reconcile that as a society? Like, to me, that, like, this is where you put the Spangler decline meme of him staring at the computer monitor. Like, that is a point in a threshold that has never existed until now. Like, I get that there were, erotic paintings or, like skin flicks in the 80s and whatnot, but like, not to the degree where we're at, and not to the degree where one's social politics are reflective of his sexual interests and vice versa, to where, oh, you're looking submissive and breedable today also means like, oh, if you have concerns about demographics, then why is it that your porn search history is X, Y, and Z? And I don't know why we going down this laundry, like, weird rabbit hole. This is not stuff I normally talk about.
There's certain even e-celebs who've had their porn preferences leaked, and it's not good.
Oh, I mean, it's a running gag in my Telegram chat that because I lived in places where I was a minority, so like ergo majority of my partners are people that don't look like me. I would make a terrible white nationalist, or maybe the perfect one because most of my exes aren't white. But like,
we have to be Brazilian to be a true white nationalist.
Oh, that's true. Shout out to my friend Dora, who's done all of my artwork because he's Brazilian and he looks like an art hoe.
There you go.
He looks like an art hoe. He face like us. And he's got the septum piercing and the side shave and the long hair and does yoga, and it's like, did you find this space of like right online personalities online? We're the most tolerant and open community of racists known to man.
I wonder if it was Dora that posted that meme that I couldn't find for the life of me, but like it was the Homer Simpson meme in the mirror, but it was like literally like this Brazilian like looking guy that like had like a very poorly drawn Austrian painter symbol on his arm, but he's like looking into the mirror and he's like a true like Giga Chad white guy in the mirror.
Yeah, that was him.
Yeah, that's my true form. Yeah.
No, he's perfect. I love him to death. He's a great guy. But yeah, like it's just like there's so many dimensions to the social space of what we all meme about, like the modern world. Or
porn is a form of biopower when you really think
it is, whether you want to admit it or not. People like, if your mind is constantly addled waiting for the next fix, or you literally cannot go a day without clicking on something and touching yourself, like it's such a form of damaging control. And like what's made it worse is that it has been weaponized as a form of biopower, to where there's always those shit lib articles about, well, if you coom X number of times, right, there's that reduced prostate cancer risk that doesn't actually have a replicable study behind it, or that, it's actually healthy for you to explore this vibrant industry because sex work, again, go back to the sexual bureaucracy thing.
Yeah.
Like, we've made women. We've made just woman, right? Like not just the ideal, but the woman as this exploitable whore, like that is sold as prostitution, as it would have been sold way back when, as a form of making ends meet. like we
Literal
mentioned
meat
with like
market, yeah.
well, right, exactly, and like how we were talking about with like the firing line to Morton Downey Jr. to Bill O'Reilly to like the kill stream, that 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 line, that there's a through line, right,
Yeah.
with America, like, oh, the working girl, oh, the frontier, saloon gal.
The frontier saloon gal was the integral to the they would like petition mostly like ladies of the night in these like bigger cities like New York, like, okay, these minors need women, do you want to come over to be like groped by a bunch of men? And then eventually they would go and like they would go in like huge numbers and they would basically be like the comfort wives of minors. That is the genetic stock that you come from, Prudentialist. Like,
That's well, half of me definitely does
it happened
come
in
from
Quebec
that
as well, because Quebec, they basically
I'm true founding stock, baby.
Yeah, in Quebec, like they basically cleaned up all of their prosties in Paris by like, okay, the Coeur d'Ivoire people need women, so it's like, well, we don't want these prosties around. Might as well just send them there to Quebec, like 7 inches of snow,
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But what were you? The point you were getting at is like.
Well, my point was getting at that, like, the ladies of the night of like the frontier, are now like the digital comfort women of like the sex deprived Zoomer, who is so deracinated. Well, huh?
Yeah. Fire take.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have many of those, and where it's just the lady of the night of the saloon gal is now a comfort woman of the sex deprived Zoomer, and he is so deracinated. Probably grew up in a home that had no parental care because both parents had to work just so they could like go to work.
Raised by the television and by the computer screen.
Raised by the television, but no longer raised by the TV. The latchkey kid raised by the television, now raised by the phone, now raised by the e-girl,
by the Xbox,
right?
Yeah,
by the e-girl, and we can trace this back to like weird online femme personalities, like from Boxy to Belle Delphine. There's a straight fucking line.
Yes,
and it all goes back down to the fact that by abdication of responsibility, the biopolitic of the pill, of the medical sacrament, of the sacrifice to Moloch, you are now seeing the society that we're at now. And this is why I find when people say that it's a modern aberration of our like issues of decline in politics. No. They're
every
much older
society
than,
that was on decline that had that.
Yeah. No. Everyone did. But what I'm saying is that like, oh, it's like, oh, this is a post-60s problem. It really isn't.
No.
This is where I really do disagree with people that say that this is a more modern aberration, because it fundamentally takes out the mechanical causality of all of these other issues. Like we just broke down, right, in this little like 45-minute discussion, we just broke down the mechanical causality about like the woman and the control that has existed through this through line of working gals to the e-girl.
Yeah.
Because men without women in a masculine role, where those like miners or frontiersmen or rail workers who would put signs on their homestead that says wives wanted, and they didn't really care what. Nowadays, it's just basically someone that would recognize my name. I mean, that's how far we've fallen. Like that's why we see this profligation.
You don't even get to have sex. Yeah. You don't even have sex with them like I do with my dominatrix girlfriend. Like, so I'm doing the courtesy Arvin thing. Yeah.
Sure. With my BDSM girl blogger.
Oh man, you did it perfectly. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
you don't even have sex with the e-girl like I do with my dungeon mistress.
Yeah.
I should talk too much shit about him because he shouted me out on a podcast. Apparently, this is what I've been told.
Yeah,
so.
He did.
Yeah. I shouldn't. Talk shit.
No, I shouldn't either, because I would love to interview him one day. And wonder what the hell happened to his patchwork international relations concept, because what does he think about IR now?
Oh God!
But I would love to poke his brain about international relations. Like, what's your foreign policy strategy, Mr. Yarvin? You've figured everything else out, but that goes on my laundry list of things I'd like to accomplish one day. But to finish this point up, we talked about the mechanical causality of this thing that goes back like hundreds of years to like now. But like what makes it worse is that, yeah, because of the infantilization, because we've structurally changed the agency of woman to where they're the ones in power. And this is where I think some of the like PUA types are kind of right about like the pill fundamentally changing things in
Yeah, or like
regards
what
to like,
CHP said about like
yeah, exactly.
relations. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, woman occupied government and like
the
not
that
the
means
Italian
something
insult.
that means something
Yeah, I know.
different. And
Yeah, not the Italian insult, but the, you know, the gynocentric aspects of our society. That might have to get edited out.
yeah, because in the UK, the WOG word is
Yes. Oh God, the English language is a fun thing to talk about when, you know, there's so much overlap for
You
slurs.
can say WAP though. I think they don't censor
Of course, right?
That's anti-Italian discrimination right there.
Yeah.
You know, but I can say it like, I mean.
Well, yeah. You're as med as it gets.
Yeah.
For anyone living in North America, right?
I do have certain like weird features for a med. Like,
yeah.
I think if I did a 23andMe, there probably is like some like Norman kicking around there somewhere.
Probably.
I mean,
but I mean, because the destruction of the family, right, has led to a lack of the male. Women too. Women are also just as bad with perpetual infantilization. But as men, a lack of the growing up, because there was nothing to grow up from, because it was in absentia, all deracinated, all latchkey, all television, all Eve girl, all phone, has led to this like promulgation of like meme plexes where like, you know, you see those things about like what men are or what men really want. Like there are two sides of men, right? Like the one that wants to like go out and kill and destroy and like win in battle or whatever, and then like the other one is like what men really also want, and it's like the whole like guts like crying in Casca's arms sort of deal. Like,
man,
but like,
that's brutal. That's brutal. That's so true.
But I find that to be so accurate though, because it's just like men have lost any fundamental space to exhibit emotions in a way that would be considered healthy, because all formulation of showing emotion traditionally has been labeled toxic in a society that I do think has been fundamentally bureaucratized by a subset of like very feminine traits that now have complete control over the West in terms of their ability to reproduce. And maybe to bring it back to more contemporary politics, you had mentioned how the blue yellow people shape things with like Canadian policy towards that specific country. Like the same thing happens here in the United States, where like our policy towards Ethiopia right now in the US is also being more or less dominated by like Ethiopian advocacy groups in America based on Ethiopian American interests. Like this really niche subset immigrant population is more or less determining our foreign policy there. So it's just like, oh, well, you know.
But that's terrible, because diaspora people tend to have, some of them have like quite a negative picture of like,
well, exactly. And you know, I think that there are certain individuals that you and I have recently known that follow certain rules that do that.
Yeah, that follow the rules.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh man, like that was hilarious when he went on Borzi's podcast and they were talking about like the Austrian painter. Like,
did you ever see that age-old political compass meme? It's like several years old at this point.
I think I remember where it came out.
It showed neo-reactionary, and it's just like literally made by the spurgiest guy ever. Just go see his interview on Borzi's podcast.
Oh yeah.
And like I remember like AA being like near the bottom, like center near like the lib left line, where like the line that had described next to academic agent was like reasonably okay libertarian, and I'm like, that's nothing near what he is now. Like that's how I know this is like such an old political
dated. half the nodes are like dead now, like, you know, they have social matter on them. Like like it's funny, like from 2015 onwards, like the amount of stuff that like the startups, like the blogs that were like pretended to be magazines, like stuff like that. It was just like there was this immense push to centralize the blog sphere, and then like everyone just like naturally went onto Twitter from like forums and like NRX blogs, except for Curtis. But like I don't know why, like Molbug's a holdout when it comes to Twitter. Does he have a reason why he never went on Twitter?
He's on Urbit.
Yeah. But I mean, like, yeah, sure. But like, no, but I mean, like, it seems like if he were to go on Twitter, it would be like quite interesting. Like, it would almost be more interesting if like that than like, you know, the fantasy of like we're gonna bring Orange Tiny Hands back to Twitter, and his like little tiny hands are gonna type the most bomb.
I don't know, man. I think he's kind of already won without being on Twitter.
Yeah,
like,
true.
Elon Musk tweeting like pictures of like Louis the 14th, saying like this looks so sexy or whatever.
Yeah, because
I'm like,
go ahead.
I tweeted it before we went to record. I had said that I'm gonna find it so I can read it out, because why not? When some guy in the late Bush years writes a blog, and now you've got tech CEOs tweeting about kings.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Like that's where we're at.
It's well, that's the thing. Like the Curtis, like okay, Molbug does not have to be on Twitter because Twitter does the bidding of Molbug anyways. It's kind of like, you don't have to like. You don't actually have to be paid off by the Kremlin to do the bidding of the Kremlin. You don't actually have to be paid by the CIA, like this person in Buffalo,
to do glowy stuff,
to do the bidding of the CIA. Exactly, like like.
I mean, Caleb Maupin will tell you that right up front. You don't have to be a part of the CIA to do what the CIA wants.
Exactly.
I mean, just like a bread tube.